My name is Elena Brooks, and I was 25 the morning I realized my father had not even been buried properly in our hearts before my brother started counting what he left behind. 3 days after Dad's funeral, Marcus walked into Mom's kitchen with a brown folder under his arm and a smile that looked too practiced. He kissed her forehead, called her sweetheart, then placed the folder on the table and said, "Mom, this is just simple paperwork. It'll make everything easier." My mother, Linda Brooks, was 67. She had cried so much that week her voice had gone thin. She still wore my father's old sweater around the house because she said it smelled like sawdust and aftershave. She looked at the papers, then she looked at Marcus. "What kind of paperwork?" she asked. Marcus laughed softly, like the question itself was proof she needed help. "Nothing complicated," he said. "Just so I can handle the accounts for you. Bills, property taxes, bank stuff. You shouldn't have to worry about money right now." Then he slid a pen toward her. I was standing by the sink, holding a mug I had not taken one sip from. Something in my chest tightened. Because my brother had never once offered to help Mom balance a checkbook when Dad was alive. But now, with Dad gone and nearly $2.1 million sitting in accounts, insurance, land, and property, Marcus suddenly wanted to be helpful. Mom reached for the pen. Her fingers were shaking. And before the tip touched the paper, I asked one question. "Mom, if you sign this today, can you change your mind tomorrow without Marcus's permission?" The kitchen went silent. Marcus stopped smiling. Mom froze. And that was the moment everything changed. Marcus answered too slowly. Just a second, maybe less, but it was enough. Because honest answers usually arrive fast. Excuses need time. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "that's not really how it works." Mom pulled her hand back from the paper. The pen stayed on the table. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "What do you mean?" she asked. Marcus forced a smile. "It just means paperwork gets complicated once it's filed. That's all." I reached over and picked up the first page. Marcus immediately tried to take it from me. "That's private." I looked at him. "It belongs to Mom." His jaw tightened. I kept reading. The document wasn't a simple bill payment authorization. It gave Marcus control over nearly every major financial decision Mom could make. Bank accounts, property, investments, insurance, everything. The room suddenly felt colder. Mom stared at the pages. "I thought you said this was just for paying bills." "It is," Marcus replied quickly. "No," I said calmly, "it isn't." For a moment nobody spoke. Then Marcus snapped. "You've been here 3 days, Elena." There it was, the same accusation he'd used my entire life. "You left. You don't belong here. You don't get a vote." While Marcus stayed in our hometown, I moved 2 hours away after college. I built a career, visited whenever I could, called every week, but in Marcus's mind, distance meant abandonment, and now he was using it again. "You think you know everything because you live in the city," he said. "I know enough to read page 1. Mom looked between us, confused, exhausted, heartbroken, and suddenly very afraid. "I don't want you two fighting," she whispered. Neither did I. This wasn't about winning. It was about protecting the only parent I had left. So I slid the papers back across the table. "Then don't sign today." Marcus pushed back his chair, hard. "You're making this difficult." "No," I replied. "The paperwork is." He grabbed the folder, stuffed the papers inside, and stormed out of the house. The front door slammed so hard, a picture frame rattled on the wall. Mom flinched, then stared down at her hands. "Maybe he's right," she said quietly. "Maybe I am getting confused." That sentence broke my heart, because my mother wasn't confused. She was grieving, and grief makes people doubt things they never questioned before, including themselves. That night after Mom went upstairs, I sat alone in Dad's old office. The room still smelled like him. Motor oil, coffee, wood dust. The desk lamp cast a yellow circle across the papers piled everywhere. Dad had owned Brooks Construction for 30 years. He saved everything. Receipts, invoices, notes, contracts. Nothing was ever thrown away. Around midnight, I opened the bottom drawer, looking for insurance records. Instead, I found a locked metal box. I almost ignored it. Then I noticed something taped underneath. A yellow envelope. My father's handwriting covered the front. Only 3 words. For Linda only. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I opened the envelope. And inside was a letter that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, especially my brother. My hands were shaking when I opened the envelope. For a moment, I almost put it back. The words, "For Linda only," stared up at me from the paper. Dad had written that. Not a lawyer, not a banker. My father. But something told me this wasn't just a goodbye letter. There was a reason he had hidden it. A reason he hadn't left it on the kitchen table with the rest of his documents. I unfolded the pages carefully. The first line hit me immediately. Linda, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I had to stop, just for a second, because suddenly I could hear his voice. Every word sounded like him, steady, practical, never dramatic, never wasting time. I kept reading. First, I need you to know something. You've always been stronger than you think you are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. My throat tightened. Dad continued. There will be people who tell you they need to take over. Some will mean well, some won't. Either way, don't hand anyone control of your life because you're afraid. I sat up straighter. Then I reached the paragraph that made my heart start pounding. I love both of our children, but love doesn't mean ignoring reality. Marcus has made financial decisions he hasn't fully shared with us. I read that sentence twice, then 3 times. Dad knew. He actually knew. The letter continued. Over the last 4 years, I've quietly paid off several debts for Marcus. I never told him I knew the full amount. I never told him I saw the loan notices. I hoped he would learn from his mistakes. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Marcus had always acted successful. New truck, new boat, expensive vacations, the biggest house among all his friends. But Dad's letter painted a different picture, one built on debt and secrets. Then I found another page folded behind the letter. A list, dates, amounts, loan balances, credit cards, business debts, personal loans. By the final entry, the total was nearly $420,000. I stared at the number. Dad hadn't written a single angry word beside it, just one note. If Marcus ever asks your mother to solve this problem with her inheritance, the answer should be no. The room suddenly felt silent, too silent. I looked around Dad's office, the old chair, the family photos, the shelves he'd built himself, and for the first time, I understood something. Dad hadn't been worried about money. He'd been worried about Mom. The inheritance wasn't the thing he was trying to protect. She was. I carefully placed the papers back into the envelope. Then I noticed one final page, a copy of a document from 6 months earlier, a property search. The address caught my eye immediately. It was Marcus's house. My pulse quickened. I studied the page, then my eyes landed on a number highlighted in yellow. Past due balance. The amount was so large I honestly thought I was reading it wrong. I checked again. No, I wasn't wrong. Marcus's house was dangerously close to foreclosure. And suddenly, his sudden concern for Mom's finances made perfect sense. The next morning, I found Mom sitting alone on the back porch. She was holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, looking out at the fields Dad loved. I sat beside her. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. Marcus is in trouble, isn't he? I turned toward her. What makes you say that? She gave a sad little smile. Because your father spent 40 years teaching me how to read people. Her eyes drifted toward the house. And that boy is scared. I thought about the letter, the debts, the foreclosure notice, the paperwork, everything. Then I asked the question that mattered. Mom, if Marcus really is in financial trouble, would you want to help him? She answered immediately. Of course. Then her expression hardened slightly. But helping someone and surrendering to someone are not the same thing. For the first time since Dad died, I saw a glimpse of the woman he had married. Strong, sharp, impossible to push around. And at that moment, neither of us realized Marcus was already making another plan, a much bigger one that wouldn't involve asking for permission at all. For the next few days, Marcus acted different, too different. He stopped bringing paperwork, stopped arguing, stopped mentioning Mom's money. On the surface, it looked like he'd accepted her decision, but my father used to say something whenever a contractor suddenly became agreeable during negotiations. When a problem gets quiet too fast, it usually isn't gone. 3 days later, I found out exactly what he meant. It happened by accident. Mom and I were sorting through condolence cards at the kitchen table when her phone rang. She answered without looking at the screen. Hello? A pause. Then confusion crossed her face. No, I didn't authorize any transfer. My head snapped up. Mom listened for another few seconds. Then her face lost color. What meeting? Another pause. I'm sorry, she said slowly. I think you have the wrong information. She ended the call and looked at me. It was the bank. My stomach tightened. What did they want? She swallowed. They said they're following up on the investment meeting Marcus scheduled for next week. The room went silent. What investment meeting? I don't know. I grabbed a notepad. What exactly did they say? Mom repeated the conversation, every word she could remember, and by the time she finished, I already knew one thing. Marcus hadn't stopped. He'd simply changed tactics. The bank manager believed Mom had agreed to meet with a financial advisor regarding a large restructuring of her assets. A restructuring Mom knew absolutely nothing about. That afternoon, we drove directly to the bank. The manager seemed genuinely surprised when Mom explained she hadn't authorized any meeting. He pulled up the notes, then frowned. Your son called several times. Mom's expression hardened. He scheduled appointments? The manager nodded. He said he was helping organize your financial transition after your husband's passing. The manager wasn't being dishonest. He thought he was helping. People hear adult son helping widowed mother and assume good intentions. Most of the time they're right. Sometimes they're not. The manager quickly canceled everything. Then he asked Mom a question. Mrs. Brooks, would you like us to note that no financial decisions should be discussed unless you're personally present? My mother didn't hesitate. Yes. For the first time, she sounded completely certain. The note was added immediately. As we walked back to the car, Mom didn't say much, but I could see something changing. Every new discovery wasn't making her weaker, it was making her clearer. The fog was lifting. That evening, Marcus showed up unexpectedly. The second he walked through the door, he knew something had happened. Mothers can read sons. Sons can read mothers. And Marcus saw it instantly. What happened? He asked. Mom folded her arms. We visited the bank. His face changed, just for a moment, but I saw it. Fear. Real fear. You went to the bank? Yes. Marcus looked at me, then back at Mom. I was only trying to help. By scheduling meetings I didn't know about? His jaw tightened. It was just a consultation. You never asked me. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Marcus sighed dramatically, the way people do when they're preparing to become the victim. You think I'm the bad guy now? Mom didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. Marcus paced across the kitchen. I've sacrificed everything for this family. There it is, I thought. The speech. The one he'd probably rehearsed. I stayed here, he continued. I worked with Dad. I kept the business alive. I gave up opportunities. His voice kept rising. And now suddenly I'm some criminal because I'm trying to protect Mom? Mom looked at him quietly, then asked the one question he clearly wasn't expecting. How much do you owe? The room froze. Marcus stopped moving. His eyes widened slightly, not because she knew, because he hadn't expected her to ask directly. What? How much? Silence. Mom held his gaze. Tell me the truth. Marcus looked away first, and that's when I knew. Not suspected. Knew. Because innocent people answer. Guilty people search for exits. Finally, he muttered, It's complicated. Mom nodded slowly. Then let's simplify it. The irony hung in the air. That word again. Simple. Everything was always simple when someone wanted her signature. How much? She repeated. Marcus sat down heavily. For the first time in weeks, he looked exhausted instead of angry. Then he gave a number so large even he couldn't say it confidently. And when the truth finally came out, it was far worse than anything Dad had written in that letter. Because Marcus wasn't just drowning in debt, he was only weeks away from losing everything, including the business. And that's when my mother made a decision none of us saw coming. A decision that would completely change the balance of power in the family. Not by giving Marcus money, but by taking something away. Marcus sat at the kitchen table staring at his hands. For years, he had always looked larger than life, confident, certain, the man with all the answers. Now he looked like a man who had finally run out of them. Mom didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't accuse him of anything. She simply listened. Loan after loan, missed payments, equipment financing, credit cards, a failed expansion project, bad investments, promises he'd made to keep the business growing. By the time he finished talking, the total debt was well over $500,000. The room was completely silent. Finally, Mom asked one question. Does Brandy know all of it? Marcus looked down. That was answer enough. Mom closed her eyes for a second. Not from anger, from disappointment. Your children can break your heart at any age. When she opened her eyes again, the softness was still there. But something else was there too. Resolve. You lied to your wife. Marcus didn't answer. You lied to your father. Still nothing. And you were about to lie to me. His shoulders dropped. For the first time, Marcus looked ashamed. Real shame. Not embarrassment. Not self-pity. Shame. Then Mom stood up, walked to the hallway, and returned holding something none of us expected. A small metal key. She placed it on the table between them. Marcus immediately recognized it. His face turned pale. The key to the house. The house where he and Brandy had lived for nearly 18 years. The house Dad had bought when Marcus and Brandy couldn't afford one. The house they never paid rent for. The house that legally belonged to Mom. Marcus stared at the key. What is this? Mom sat down again. This is reality. He looked confused, then angry, then afraid. Mom! She raised a hand, and for once, Marcus stopped talking. You've spent weeks trying to convince me I'm incapable of making decisions. Her voice remained calm. But the truth is, you've been making bad decisions for years. Marcus looked away. Mom continued. You treated this house like it was yours. It practically is. The words slipped out before he could stop them, and the second they did, he knew he'd made a mistake. Mom nodded slowly. No, she tapped the key gently. It isn't. The silence that followed felt enormous. Then Mom leaned forward and laid out the new rules. Not punishment, reality. A proper lease, a written agreement, monthly rent, clear financial records, no more hidden debts, no more secret loans, no more using future inheritance as collateral for today's mistakes. Everything on paper, everything transparent, everything accountable. Marcus looked stunned. You can't be serious. Mom smiled sadly. Oh, I'm very serious. The old Linda Brooks was gone. The frightened widow, the woman doubting herself, the woman almost ready to sign whatever someone placed in front of her. She was gone. And sitting in her place was the woman Dad had trusted all along. Marcus pushed back from the table. This is because of Elena. No. Mom's answer came instantly. This is because of you. The words landed harder than any shout ever could. For several seconds, Marcus looked like he wanted to argue. Then he stopped. Because deep down, he knew she was right. He had created this. Not me, not Mom, not Brandy. Him. Mom picked up the key, held it for a moment, then placed it directly in front of him. You have two choices. Marcus looked at her. If you want help, I'll help you. She pointed at the papers she'd prepared with an attorney. We do it legally. We do it honestly. And we do it together. Then her voice became firmer. But if you're looking for control over my money, my accounts, my property, or my future, she slid the key the final inch across the table. That conversation is over. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked softly. 1 second, then another. Finally, Marcus picked up the key, not like a winner, like a man accepting terms. And for the first time since Dad died, my mother looked completely at peace, because the decision was hers, not mine, not Marcus's, hers. And the strange thing is this, the real revenge wasn't taking anything away from my brother. It was refusing to let him take anything from her. A few months later, Marcus signed the lease. The business entered a restructuring program. Brandy finally learned the full truth, and my mother began managing her finances herself, every Friday afternoon, at the same kitchen table, with a pair of reading glasses resting on her nose. Sometimes when I visit, I find her reviewing statements, balancing numbers, asking questions. The same woman who once believed she couldn't understand any of it, turns out she could. She always could. She just needed someone to remind her. The last time I visited, a salesman stopped by with paperwork and a pen. Mom smiled, adjusted her glasses, and said something that would have made Dad proud. Leave it here. I'll read every word first. And watching her say it, I realized something. My father didn't leave behind $2 million. He left behind a lesson. Never hand over your voice simply because someone tells you you're too old, too tired, or too broken to use it. And once my mother remembered that lesson, nobody could ever take it from her again. 6 months later, things looked very different. Not perfect, different. Marcus was still living in the house, but now every payment arrived on the first of the month, on time, in writing, no excuses, no promises, no shortcuts. The first few months were rough. More than once, he called Mom hoping she would bend the rules. More than once, she politely said no. And every single time, she survived the guilt that followed. That was new for her. For most of her life, my mother believed love meant saying yes. Dad used to tell her otherwise. Real love, he'd say, sometimes sounds like no. Now she finally understood what he meant. One Saturday afternoon, I drove down to visit. The old workshop behind the house was open. Marcus was inside alone, working. For a second, he looked exactly like Dad. Same posture, same concentration, same grease on his hands. Age has a funny way of turning sons into their fathers. We talked for a while, not about money, not about the fight, just life. Before I left, he surprised me. You know, he said quietly, I hated you for a while. I laughed. I know. He nodded. I really thought you were trying to take everything away from me. I looked toward the house where Mom was watering flowers. No, I said. I was trying to stop you from losing everything. Marcus followed my gaze. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I'd waited months to hear. You were right. Not a dramatic apology, not a movie speech, just the truth. Sometimes that's worth more. That evening we all ate dinner together, the same kitchen, the same table. But it felt different now, healthier, honest. Mom sat at the head of the table, not because anyone assigned her the seat, because everyone knew it was hers. After dinner she pulled a folder from a drawer. Marcus groaned immediately. Oh no. Mom smiled. Oh yes. She handed him a document. What is this? The annual review. Marcus stared at her. The what? The annual review, she repeated. You wanted access to my finances so badly. Now you get to sit here once a year and listen while I explain exactly how they're doing. For the first time in months, everyone laughed. Even Marcus. Especially Marcus. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, Mom walked me to the door. The porch light cast a soft glow across the yard. She hugged me. Then she looked back through the kitchen window, at the table, at the family photos, at the life she'd nearly handed away because someone convinced her she couldn't manage it alone. You know what the funniest part is? She said. What? She smiled. I was never confused. No. You weren't. She squeezed my hand. I was just lonely. And somehow those 4 words explained everything. Because loneliness can sound like trust. Grief can sound like agreement. Fear can sound like yes. But none of those things are consent. My mother learned that, and once she did, nobody ever got to speak for her again. Not even family.